Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are wrestling with a subject that is, well, it's terrifyingly complex, frustratingly costly, and often just heartbreakingly unsafe. The modern American healthcare system.
We're talking about a system that, routinely fails the most vulnerable. And it fails because its essential moving parts, its highly trained professionals, its critical data, all of it, they don't actually communicate. They don't coordinate effectively.
Right.
And so our mission today is to break down the sources that argue, and I think argue very compellingly, for a massive non-negotiable shift in how care is delivered.
Okay, so what are we focusing on specifically?
We're zeroing in on the central critical role of interprofessional collaboration, or IPC, and the advanced nurse leader, particularly the doctor of nursing practice, the DNP, in fixing what is, let's be honest, a broken model.
And our sources for this dive are not light reading. We have pulled from a really heavy mix of influential material.
Yeah, this is the deep end of the pool. We're looking at high-level academic and policy reports like those landmark findings from the Institute of Medicine, the IOM.
Those were huge.
They were. And then we have deep policy analyses looking at the implementation and impact of the Affordable Care Act, the PPACA, plus established business literature on how high-performing teams actually function.
And maybe most importantly, we also have these intimate clinical stories that reveal the true human cost of all this systemic failure.
Exactly. And we've really tailored this deep dive for you, the listener, so you can walk away with a really solid practical grasp of what's going on. We want you to know not just what interprofessional collaboration is,
but why it's so essential.
Right. Why it's critical for future health systems, for safety, how the current political and policy landscape is actually trying to support advanced nursing practice. And this is the big one, the enormous, deeply rooted cultural and historical barriers that are actively stopping this from happening everywhere.
So it's a fight against history and habit.
It really is.
And to really grasp the stakes here, the monumental stakes, we're not going to start with a policy brief. We're not starting with legislation. We're going to start immediately with a tragedy. It's a single poignant story that perfectly encapsulates these failures. It's the story of Robbie, a 2-month-old infant in a large, loving Irish family, and it was recounted by his sister, who is a nurse, in this really raw clinical anecdote.
So Robbie, at 2 months old, he goes to his primary care physician for a routine checkup. He gets his DPT vaccination. That's diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus.
Standard stuff.
Totally standard. But shortly after, the child becomes acutely ill. So ill that he has to spend about a week in the intensive care unit.
Wow.
He recovered, thankfully, but that initial event, that was a massive catastrophic failure point in the system that just got completely missed.
And it's the next visit where the system failed again, but this time it was lethal. So you fast forward a couple of months. Robbie's now 4 months old. He goes in for his checkup. The doctor examines him, says he's developing normally, and then completely disconnected from what just happened, he says, I'm going to give him his DPT vaccination.
He just proposed repeating it. Initially, he'd completely forgotten the catastrophic event, the ICU stay, everything that had happened just weeks before.
Unbelievable.
And his sister, who was there in the room, immediately spoke up. She reminded the doctor, she recounted the entire near-fatal episode.
And the doctor, what did he do?
He paused. You can imagine him processing this new information. And then in just a devastating moment of clinical judgment failure, he dismissed the connection. He said the prior illness had nothing to do with it.
He just waves it away.
Waved it away. But then he did something even more confusing. He tried to compromise. He decided, with no clinical evidence to support it, to give the child half a dose.
And Robbie died within 24 hours. And it's an overwhelming story.
It is, but it's necessary because it leads us directly to the 3 crucial, penetrating questions that Robbie's nurse sister asked. And these questions frame the core structural problems of our entire healthcare system. They're the questions this whole deep dive is going to address.
Okay, so what were those 3 questions, and how do they map onto this idea of systemic failure?
The first question was so simple, but it points to a massive infrastructure breakdown. She asked, why do you keep records separate? Why are the hospital records separate from the doctor's office records?
That's a failure of information, a failure of systems.
Exactly. It's system interoperability, coordinated data flow. It's the fundamental problem of information silos.
Okay. And the second question?
Why did he not know that that wasn't the right thing to do? And this speaks to a failure of clinical knowledge, a failure of evidence-based practice, a failure to consult or coordinate when you're faced with a serious complication. It's a knowledge and practice breakdown.
And the third one? The most gut-wrenching human question. Why didn't he listen to me?
That one goes straight to the heart of it. That question speaks directly to the failure of communication, to the inherent hierarchy of the system, and the complete lack of trust built into these fragmented models of care.
It's what our sources call the cloak of competence.
Yes, the societal expectation that the physician is the sole source of knowledge. It completely shut down the voice of a knowledgeable family member who is trying to give him life-saving information.
And that failure to communicate, to coordinate, to just flatten the hierarchy for a moment, it's not some abstract management problem.
No. It's a direct matter of life and death, as we saw with Robbie.
That story is just a chilling reminder that the cost of all this inefficiency, this hierarchy, it's paid in human lives.
Okay, so let's take that individual tragedy and use it as the catalyst. We're moving now to the massive systemic shift that's required to make patient care safer and better, starting with who is mandated to lead that change.
So to really understand this shift towards collaboration, we first have to define who the future leaders of this movement are, specifically within the nursing profession. Right, and we're turning to the Advanced Practice Registered Nurse, or the APRN.
Exactly. The 2008 consensus model for APRN regulation, which is this highly influential framework, it standardized advanced practice nursing into 4 recognized roles.
And those 4 essential roles are, we have certified nurse practitioners, or CNPs, certified nurse midwives, CNMs, clinical nurse specialists, CNSs, and certified registered nurse anesthetists, or CRNAs.
Correct. And the core function for all of them, for all APRNs, is providing direct patient or population care. They're prepared in accredited graduate programs, they get national certification in their specialty, and they have to meet state regulatory requirements for a license.
So this is a highly credentialed group.
Very. They're prepared to assume a significant amount of responsibility.
Now, here's where we have to pause, because I think there's a huge amount of confusion, both with the public and even inside healthcare settings, about the terminal degree, the DNP. It stands for Doctor of Nursing Practice. But you often hear people mess this up. They'll call it a Doctor of Nurse Practitioner, which is a mistake that really obscures what it's all about.
That is such a critical distinction to make. The DNP is purely an academic degree. It is the terminal professional degree in nursing. It is not a specific clinical role.
Okay, break that down.
It's a practice-focused doctoral program. It's designed to prepare nurses at the highest level of practice to translate research and to lead system change.
So if a nurse earns a DNP, they've reached the top of their professional education ladder. It's sort of like how a physician gets an MD or DO, or a pharmacist gets a PharmD.
Precisely.
But, and this is the key part, their DNP degree doesn't by itself let them function as a nurse practitioner.
No. Not unless they also completed a CMP track and got that specific certification. The DNP is meant to equip the nurse with advanced skills in translation, in systems thinking, which is why not all DNPs even function in direct clinical care.
And that's where the confusion clears up for me. A lot of DNPs work in specialties that don't even involve direct patient care.
Exactly. You'll find them in areas like administration, quality assurance, informatics, education, public health. Their advanced graduate preparation lets them enhance the profession by applying this doctoral-level, practice-focused knowledge to organizational and systemic improvements.
So they're tackling the very issues that led to Robbie's story, the broken communication, the separate records, even if they're not at the bedside.
They're focused on the architecture of care delivery itself.
And the outcomes of this advanced nursing care. I mean, this isn't theoretical anymore. It's exceptionally well documented. If DNPs are supposed to lead this overhaul, what's the evidence? What's the documented impact of APRNs that proves they deserve a seat at the collaborative table?
The research consensus is really strong and positive. APRNs consistently deliver excellent quality, highly cost-effective care, and they get high levels of patient satisfaction.
And that's huge when you consider the challenges we're facing.
Monumental challenges. The sheer complexity of care, the rapidly changing patient demographics, the explosion of chronic conditions that need long-term management, and of course the ongoing economic pressures.
So APRNs can't just be present, they have to be empowered.
Yes. Their specific documented influence on health outcomes is vital to any kind of real reform effort.
This inherent value, combined with the systemic crisis, it brings us to the policy mandate, and specifically the Affordable Care Act, the PPACA, signed into law back in 2010. This wasn't just about expanding insurance, was it? It was policy as a massive, intentional driving force for collaborative, team-based nursing care.
That context is so critical. The push for reform, which was rooted in President Obama's 2008 proposal, it emphasized collaborative teams as the key mechanism to deliver comprehensive, cost-effective, and safe care, especially for managing chronic conditions.
And while the PPACA remains, a highly charged political topic,
Oh, absolutely.
the fundamental problems it tried to address, access, safety, affordability, they haven't gone anywhere. And public opinion has consistently favored refining the law rather than just getting rid of it.
Which affirms the need for the systemic solutions that were embedded within that legislation.
So how exactly did the PPACA specifically target nursing and advanced practice to make them a part of the solution?
Well, the law was incredibly specific. It recognized advanced practice nurses, particularly nurse practitioners, and positioned them as integral to solving the documented shortages of primary care physicians, especially in medically underserved areas.
And it put money behind it.
It did. It explicitly expanded funding for NP training and education. But beyond just the funding, several key provisions intentionally identified nurses as interprofessional team leaders and members. It was a policy signal, a shift away from the old physician-centric models.
I think we need a concrete example here.
Yeah.
How was this mandate functionally written into the policy? So we can see it wasn't just an implied role.
Okay, let's look directly at the medical or healthcare home provision. That's Section 3502 of the PPACA.
Right.
This section explicitly identified interdisciplinary teams, and the list included nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, pharmacists, social workers, other allied health professionals, all working together to provide coordinated, integrated, evidence-based care for complex patients and families.
And the DNP is the ideal person to lead that kind of team.
They are the ideal professional to lead the implementation and evaluation of such a complex, integrated model because of their expertise in systems and outcome measurement.
So the policy demands the team, and the DNP provides the expertise to manage that team and measure its success. Were there other provisions that supported nurse-led care specifically?
Absolutely. The amendment to the Public Health Services Act supported nurse-managed health centers. This amendment allocated grant funds for advanced practice nurses to coordinate and deliver comprehensive primary and wellness care to vulnerable populations.
And the key part?
The key part is that it mandated that nurses be the major providers of services in these APRN-led teams. It firmly placed the nurse in the leadership role for specific patient populations.
And beyond just traditional clinics, we see this policy playing out in some innovative models, right? The ones aimed at reducing expensive hospital stays.
That's where the Independence at Home demonstration projects come in. That's Section 3024 of the PPACA. These projects clearly designate nurse practitioners as leaders or key participants in teams aimed at improving outcomes and reducing costs for homebound Medicare beneficiaries, a notoriously high-cost group. Furthermore, clinical nurse specialists were noted as essential leaders in preventing hospital-acquired conditions in acute care settings. So the DNP, operating at the highest level of clinical nursing practice and systems expertise, is therefore mandated by this legislation to participate fully as team leaders and members in these innovative models.
The crucial responsibility of actually documenting the improved outcomes.
Yes, proving that their collaboration and leadership works.
What's so fascinating here is that the policy wasn't simply about, giving people access to care. It was fundamentally about redesigning the workforce to be inherently collaborative and nurse-inclusive. It was a recognition that the complexity of modern medicine demands the system-level expertise that APRNs and DNPs bring to the table.
And this brings us directly to the foundational why of teamwork. It all circles back to the story of Robbie and this broader crisis of quality, errors, and cost. This whole movement is really rooted in the high-stakes findings of the Institute of Medicine.
Let's start with the first, most shocking report. The IOM's 1999 report, To Err is Human, Building a Safer Health System. That was a seismic event.
It was a bombshell.
Because it quantified medical errors as a leading cause of death in the United States.
And right after that quantification, interprofessional communication and collaboration were immediately identified. They were articulated as primary, foundational measures needed to improve quality and drastically reduce errors.
So the message was clear. Silence and hierarchy kill.
Exactly. But the problem was even bigger than just errors. Just 2 years later, the IOM followed up with the 2001 report, Crossing the Quality Chasm, a new health system for the 21st century.
Okay, so what were the systemic issues they identified that demanded this kind of collaboration?
Crossing the Quality Chasm pointed to 4 massive issues that were contributing to poor quality of care. First, the sheer complexity of knowledge and skills required for modern care. No single person can know enough.
Right.
2, the dramatic increase in chronic conditions that require long-term coordinated management, not just, one-off acute treatments.
3rd,
Inefficient, disorganized delivery systems, riddled with silos, just like the one that separated Robbie's hospital and office records.
and 4th.
The challenges of implementing information technology effectively.
That paints a picture of a system that is just. It's fundamentally mismatched for the needs of its patients today.
It absolutely is. And the core conclusion of Crossing the Quality Chasm was that providers and institutions have to actively collaborate. They have to exchange information and coordinate care because the needs of any person or population are, and I'm quoting here, beyond the expertise of any single health profession.
So this isn't a suggestion for better customer service.
No, it's a policy declaration. It's saying that collaboration is a core requirement for basic competency in modern medicine.
And this philosophical shift aligns perfectly with what has become the blueprint for systemic improvement, the triple aim model. This concept from Berwick, Nolan, and Whittington, it's over 25 years old now, but it provides the framework for why all these structural changes are necessary.
The triple aim represents a fundamental challenge to the status quo. It requires health systems to pursue 3 simultaneous and interdependent goals.
Which are?
Improving the health of a population, so moving beyond just individual patient care. Improving the experience of care quality and safety, and critically reducing the per capita cost of providing that care.
And you can't achieve one without the other two.
You can't. If you try to cut costs without improving the care experience, you just cut quality. If you try to improve population health without reducing per capita costs, the whole system becomes unsustainable.
So how does collaboration become the necessary mechanism to balance these 3 aims?
Well, achieving the triple aim requires a fundamental redesign of primary care, moving away from the idea that it's just reactive. The model has to stop being physician-centric, which tends to focus on episodic, acute care.
Instead, it has to be collaborative.
It has to utilize diverse teams of practitioners who coordinate and share information seamlessly, not just among providers, but crucially with patients themselves. This means involving individuals and families through effective communication, shared decision-making, and constantly measuring the actual costs and effectiveness of the care delivered by the team, not just the individual provider.
And when this collaboration actually works, when it moves from theory to practice, what do the sources tell us about the documented benefits?
The data is compelling. Effective collaborative care has been consistently linked with reduced patient complications, decreased lengths of stay, improved control of chronic disease outcomes.
Which hits the population health aim.
Right. And higher patient and provider satisfaction.
Which hits the experience aim.
Exactly. And regulatory bodies, like the Joint Commission, reinforce all of this. They recognize IPC as essential for preventing medical error, specifically by targeting improved communication and collaboration as a means to better protect patients from harm.
Okay, before we delve into the barriers, let's address the language. We've been using interprofessional and interdisciplinary. The critique in our sources noted that these are often used interchangeably, but the nuance is critical to understanding true power sharing.
It really is. The distinction, while it's subtle, it separates just working in the same building from genuine teamwork. Interprofessional collaboration is the broader, more desirable term.
Why is that?
It describes interactions among individuals who bring their unique educational backgrounds, experiences, values, roles, and identities to the process. The focus is on the interaction and the mutual respect for the different perspectives each person brings, even where skills might overlap.
So interprofessional is about respecting the whole person and their unique professional viewpoint. What about interdisciplinary?
Interdisciplinary is more narrowly focused on the knowledge of a particular discipline, the subject matter, the know-how. But true collaboration, as Dr. Sullivan defined it back in 1997, it transcends just sharing knowledge. It's a dynamic, transforming process of creating a power-sharing partnership.
A power-sharing partnership. That's the key phrase.
It is. The American College of Physicians reinforced this. They suggested collaboration requires mutual acknowledgement, understanding, and respect for the complementary roles and skills of the entire team. It demands active participation, respecting all contributions, engaging the patient, and allowing leadership to adapt based on patient needs, not on rigid titles.
This emphasis on adaptability, on fluidity, on systemic comprehension. It brings us right back to the DNP. Why is a DNP ideally suited to step into this collaborative leadership role, especially with that strict definition of collaboration as a power-sharing partnership?
DNPs are uniquely positioned because their doctoral education mandates advanced clinical scientific knowledge plus comprehension of organizational and systems improvements, outcome evaluation processes, healthcare policy, and high-level leadership.
So they have the toolkit?
They have the toolkit for leading fluid, adaptive teams in this complex, ever-changing health arena. The AACN's Essentials of Doctoral Education states clearly that DNPs must be prepared to play a central role in establishing interprofessional teams participating in the work and assuming leadership when it's appropriate based on the specific needs of the patient or population they serve.
So they are educated to see the whole system, not just their clinical silo.
Exactly. The DNP's training moves beyond the individual patient encounter and focuses on the architecture of the system itself, the very thing the Triple Aim demands be fundamentally redesigned. They are trained to be the organizational and clinical bridge builder.
Okay, so we've established this overwhelming mandate from the IOM to the PPACA, and we've identified the capable leader, the DNP. But if the need is so clear, why is effective collaboration, as our sources state, far from reality? I mean, if physicians, nurses, and policymakers all agree on the theory, why does this deeply entrenched silo mentality persist?
The problem is that the healthcare delivery system remains stubbornly hierarchical and siloed because it is built on a century-old foundation of power imbalance, specifically between nursing and medicine.
So to understand the present, we have to look at the past.
We absolutely must look back at the historical roots of this hierarchy.
So how exactly did that physician-dominant hierarchy get established? I mean, it wasn't always this way.
It wasn't always the case. Throughout the 19th century, nurses generally cared for patients inside hospitals, which were often run by charitable lay boards. Physicians, however, they primarily worked in their private offices or made house calls.
So the hospital was the nurse's domain?
Largely, yes. But the dynamic shifted as medicine became more and more science-oriented around the turn of the 20th century, especially with things like the Flexner Report and the rise of germ theory. Doctors realized that hospitals were these centers of complex, acute illness where they could apply their new scientific knowledge and technology.
And this claim to scientific knowledge became the justification for seizing control of the whole institutional power structure.
Precisely. Medicine swiftly claimed intellectual and administrative control of the hospitals, arguing they owned the special knowledge required for diagnosis and treatment. And this narrative strategically excluded nurses,
relegating them to the handmaiden role.
Yes. They were valued for their moral qualities, often described in policy as needing to be selfless, knowledgeless, and virtuous. Knowledge and intellect were appropriated by the medical field.
That contrast, virtue versus scientific expertise, is staggering. And this deeply fragmented, physician-dominant model, it hasn't just been a professional slight, it's had a profound financial consequence, hasn't it?
It absolutely has. This fragmented care model has been directly implicated in driving up healthcare costs, promoting polypharmacy where multiple doctors prescribe conflicting or excessive medications, and encouraging those silo practices. In the language of complexity leadership, which we'll get to later, if one element of an adaptive system becomes too dominant and refuses to yield, the entire system loses its flexibility and its capacity to adapt to shifting needs. Our acute care episodic system is failing to meet the chronic disease needs of the 21st century population, which is why DNPs are needed to bring that holistic, system-level nursing perspective to empowerment.
So what are the current obstacles we see today that are the direct descendants of these historical roots?
The barriers are multifaceted. There's the gender imbalance in high-status roles, existing power structures baked into institutional bylaws, disparities in social status, deep differences in educational philosophy, and most visibly, what's commonly referred to as turf protection.
Ah, the turf wars. They're highly publicized, particularly around scope of practice. Our source material points to the reaction of the American Medical Association, the AMA, to the IOM's Future of Nursing report.
The AMA's response was a classic example of turf protection. They specifically challenged nursing's expanded role, particularly regarding primary care autonomy. They insisted on a physician-led team approach to care.
And how did they justify that?
They intentionally emphasized the differences in educational hours and curriculum to suggest that nurses were less prepared for primary care than physicians. It's a clear rhetorical strategy aimed at preserving the existing hierarchy and preventing that power-sharing partnership we talked about.
But is there any genuine merit to the AMA's argument about educational hours, or is that purely a political tactic?
Well, that's the core tension, isn't it? While physicians do have more classroom hours focused on diagnosis and treatment of acute rare diseases, the DNP argument rests on the focus and the outcomes of their education.
Which are different.
Completely different. DNPs, while having deep clinical knowledge, are specifically educated in prevention, health promotion, systems improvement, policy, and chronic disease management, the very things the Triple Aim demands. The AMA's focus on comparative hours ignores the fact that different professions bring complementary, non-overlapping expertise.
So it frames the issue as a deficit in nursing knowledge.
Right, rather than acknowledging nursing's unique, system-level expertise that threatens the traditional power structure.
And these historical power dynamics, they manifest directly as destructive behavior in clinical settings, and that often impacts patient outcomes.
Absolutely. The Joint Commission highlighted this back in 2008, that poor communication, often driven by status and hierarchy, is strongly connected to adverse events. We see disruptive behavior in two forms. Physician disruptive behavior is typically overt and direct think, verbal abuse, angry outbursts.
And nurse disruptive behavior.
It often hides in passive-aggressive forms, backdoor undermining, clique formation, or withholding critical information. Both forms just decimate the psychological safety required for a high-performing team.
Let's talk more about the cloak of competence. That sounds like the historical legacy personified in a modern physician.
It is a massive barrier to honest dialogue. Physicians are socialized from their very first days in medical training to adopt this cloak, this image of unwavering confidence and perceived competence.
Society expects the doctor to know everything.
And to always be decisive, especially in emergencies. This pressure leads the physician to believe they must always make the final decision in the team, regardless of the input from other professionals, because admitting uncertainty is perceived as weakness or failure.
And this fundamentally maintains the power imbalance.
Yes, the physician's voice inherently carries more weight, preventing other voices, like Robbie's sister, from ever being heard.
So if nurses are to break free of that handmaiden legacy and truly lead collaboration, they have to assert their value in a way that is visible and recognized by the system.
That is perhaps the greatest contemporary challenge for nursing. Nurses must articulate the demonstrable role they play in improving patient care, because so much of their expertise, the care coordination, the emotional support for a family through crisis, the preventative education, it's all difficult to quantify.
And it's often unrecognized.
Unrecognized by other professionals, and it doesn't fit neatly into reimbursement systems or standardized electronic health records.
So it's a vital responsibility of the DNP, maybe collaborating with PhD nurse scientists, to define and articulate the quantifiable role nurses play in promoting positive outcomes that are invisible in traditional billing models.
And that articulation begins at the individual level. With self-presentation, role identification and clarity are paramount, especially given the confusing landscape of titles in the U.S. system. Nurses have to use their voice of agency when communicating their role.
This isn't about being boastful.
Not at all. It's an accurate acknowledgement of their unique contributions and value added, which sets the foundation for a professional power-sharing partnership.
The example in the source material is so simple, yet so illustrative. How might the DNP's role be valued if she is introduced as Mary from Pediatrics versus Dr. Mary Jones, pediatric nurse practitioner?
It's a world of difference. The use of full names and credentials conveys professionalism and credibility on par with other healthcare colleagues, which is the necessary foundation for dissolving that hierarchy. So to move beyond these deep-seated barriers of history and turf wars, we really need to focus on structure and process. The Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the IHI, identifies two foundational domains for safe care: developing a culture of safety and building a robust learning system.
And both of those are entirely dependent on structured team development.
Exactly.
So let's provide that structure for the listener by walking through the classic stages of team development. This is the Tuckman and Jensen model: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. It gives us a clear roadmap.
Okay, starting with forming, this is the initial stage. Members arrive as individuals, and they're trying to define the mission, the roles, the responsibilities. The fundamental critical task here is building trust, both cognitive and affective trust.
So this is where the team has to spend time just discussing and understanding the specific scope of each profession represented.
Acknowledging overlap, diversity in function, setting ground rules for communication.
And they must immediately work to reduce jargon. You need a shared language to prevent new power imbalances from forming right away.
Absolutely. This is why standardized communication tools are so vital, like SBR situation, background assessment, and recommendation, which was pioneered by Kaiser Permanente. SBR is a simple, standardized structure that interprofessional teams can use for discussion and high-stakes problem solving.
But SBRR is more than just an acronym, right? Tell us how its structure forces collaboration and helps mitigate that hierarchy.
SBR works because it forces brevity, clarity, and most importantly, structured rationale. When a CNP or an RN uses SBR to communicate with a physician, they're not just providing information, they are forced to present their assessment, their clinical judgment, and their recommendation, their proposed action.
So it prevents the physician from just saying, just tell me the facts.
It does. It forces the professional submitting the information to use their voice of agency and clinical expertise to propose a course of action. It demands a response to a professional recommendation, effectively flattening that traditional hierarchical chain of information flow.
That really shifts the power dynamic from, I'm telling you what happened, to, here is my professional assessment of what we should do. Okay, so next comes storming. This is where the rubber meets the road and conflict inevitably arises.
That's right. Conflict is guaranteed because members come from diverse professional worldviews, educational philosophies, personal communication styles, and trust is not yet fully developed. It is absolutely vital that the leader encourages the team to face this conflict directly, not avoid it, and for members to practice patience and tolerance.
Because if a team just skips the storming stage,
They fail to leverage the valuable differences of opinion that prevent groupthink and lead to superior results.
then we shift to norming.
In norming, members start developing a true team identity. They establish internal processes for critique, conflict resolution, information sharing. Constructive criticism becomes acceptable, and members begin resolving problems and gaining genuine respect for one another's expertise. But even here, it's important to actively elicit differences of opinion to ensure the team doesn't get too comfortable and fall into groupthink.
And that prepares them for performing, which is the goal state.
The performing stage, team members set aside their individual and professional turf needs to achieve the shared patient goal. They're flexible, autonomous, fully committed to the mission. And finally, adjourning concludes the process, allowing the team to formally evaluate their performance, review outcomes, and celebrate accomplishments before they disband or pivot to a new project.
Okay, let's move beyond the stages to the specific structural drivers that make these teams successful. The second core driver is reciprocal trust. And this gets particularly complicated when we consider modern, often virtual teams.
Trust is foundational. Members of a high-trust team have to continually work to maintain interpersonal relationships, both cognitive, so trusting competence, and effective, which is trusting intentions. The leader must be willing to show vulnerability, to give up control, and to intently listen to and value the unique viewpoints of others, because trust is contagious.
And when we transition to virtual, asynchronous environments, how does the nature of trust fundamentally change?
Well, studies show that trust is built differently based on proximity. Face-to-face teams often form that effective trust based on benevolence. The human connection forged during informal meetings, like chatting during a lunch break.
Right.
Virtual teams, however, they tend to rely more heavily on ability or competence. Trust is built on performance, delivering work on time, showing expertise. If a team member fails to meet a deadline, it damages the trust instantly.
So what practical strategies do the sources recommend for building both kinds of trust in virtual IPC teams, especially that effective trust?
The strategies have to be intentional. Sources recommend that ideally the team should meet physically 4 to 5 times, particularly early in the forming stage, and specifically build in social time to foster that effective trust.
And when they can't?
When meeting virtually, the use of video conferencing is highly recommended over simple audio. Nonverbal cues are just essential for decreasing ambiguity and building rapport. Furthermore, teams should intentionally incorporate caring talk or personal conversations, brief check-ins about family or hobbies, to develop effective trust, to see the humanity in one another, which is a key antidote to the distant nature of virtual work.
Our third core driver is functioning at the highest level. This goes straight back to the economic pressure we discussed with the triple aim.
The goal of collaboration is innovative, cost-effective care. This requires all healthcare providers to truly work to the top of their licenses. This is a fundamental system requirement. It means every discipline must relinquish some tasks that can be done more cost-effectively or more appropriately by another provider on the team.
Let's detail that required shifting of tasks. How does working to the top of one's license redistribute responsibility in a practical way?
In a truly collaborative model, advanced practice nurses, particularly CNPs, take on increased responsibility for routine, chronic, and acute care, as well as health maintenance and prevention.
Which frees up the physicians.
Exactly. Physicians are then freed up to focus on diagnosing and treating the most complex, unstable, or rare patients, utilizing their specialized training most efficiently. Meanwhile, registered nurses, RNs, they shift into these sophisticated roles as care coordinators, coaches, patient educators, managing the complex pre- and post-visit planning required for chronic disease management.
Every discipline has to give something up.
Everyone, and this RN then works with a consulting psychiatrist, reviewing patients weekly for case management and consultation without the psychiatrist having to see every single patient. This model has proven to be highly cost-effective, providing better depression outcomes than standard care. It just demonstrates the immense power of optimizing roles based on skill, not just on title.
That success sounds undeniable, but you mentioned earlier that the challenge is providing a payment structure that rewards this type of shared care.
That is the ultimate systemic barrier. Traditional fee-for-service, production models of compensation, which we'll detail more later, they reward the physician for volume and individual procedures. They do not reward them for supervising an RN case manager or ceding a routine task to a CNP, even if it leads to better patient outcomes.
So the payment structure actively undermines the collaborative structure.
At its core, the financial reward system is still focused on the individual silo, not the team outcome.
That structural challenge leads us to our final driver in this section, promoting a collaborative work culture. What does that entail beyond just talking about teamwork?
A work culture that genuinely embraces collaboration has several essential components. First, a high degree of psychological safety. Second, a flattened power differential or hierarchy. Third, active administrative support that allocates resources specifically for collaboration time. And fourth, physical space design that promotes interaction, like interdisciplinary meeting rooms and shared charting areas.
Let's zoom in on psychological safety, because that is paramount for team learning, especially when mistakes are involved.
Psychological safety, as defined by Amy Edmondson, means that employees feel safe enough to ask the stupid question, to respectfully criticize a senior staff member's plan, to admit mistakes without fear of punitive action, and to suggest new, often risky ideas without appearing disruptive.
So organizations must actively support upward voice.
They have to. Upward voice is communication directed to someone higher in the hierarchy who has the perceived power to act on the problem. If an RN fears speaking up about an error they witness because it might cost them their job, the entire system is unsafe.
And this emphasis on psychological safety ties back directly to patient safety by shifting the focus away from individual error and towards system improvement.
Yes. Leaders in healthcare are now consciously looking at successes in high-reliability organizations like aviation. In aviation, the focus of safety improvement is on the systems in which individuals operate, rather than focusing solely on individual blame.
Which is supported by non-punitive incident reporting systems.
Right, often using tools developed by the AHRQ. This ensures that issues are brought to the forefront, so systemic architectural improvements can be made, preventing the fear of penalty from causing a massive decrease in safety reporting. And DNPs are required to provide the ethical and organizational leadership to champion this culture of both psychological and systems safety. Redesigning healthcare away from these traditional, rigid command and control models. It requires not just effective managers, but transformative leaders. And we have to distinguish clearly between management and true leadership.
Right. Management focuses on coordinating resources, budgeting, scheduling, all to meet established organizational goals.
Leadership, in contrast, creates and inspires necessary change. It's built fundamentally on personal relationships and vision.
Exactly. And the IOM, recognizing this need for systemic transformation, deemed transformational leadership vital for the future of healthcare way back in 2003. This style, first developed by Burns, is based on empowering all team members, including the leader, to work together toward a shared, compelling goal.
So the leader operates by communicating to people their own worth and potential so clearly that they come to see that potential in themselves.
Yes, inspiring them beyond their perceived limitations.
And the beauty of the transformational leader is that they don't necessarily need a formal title or an administrative position. They can lead from any chair in the organization just by coaching, inspiring, and mentoring to transform individuals and the organization itself.
And a philosophical cousin to transformational leadership is the model of complexity leadership, described powerfully by Margaret Wheatley. This view looks at organizations not as linear, predictable machines, but as biological, self-organizing, adaptive systems, which is contrary to the typical Western-style, linear, hierarchical model.
Completely.
So how does that biological analogy apply to a clinical team?
Well, Wheatley views change not as something to be controlled, but as life itself, an ever-present natural process. She notes that while life resists command and control, it embraces creative motion and self-organization. This model suggests that successful clinical teams should be allowed to self-organize and adapt in response to patient needs or crises, building communities that are no longer ruled by rigid bureaucratic hierarchy.
So for a DNP leader, this means setting the conditions like psychological safety for adaptation, rather than just issuing explicit commands for every step of the process.
You got it.
Moving from leadership style to execution, all of this collaborative work, the trust, the adaptation, the shared goals, it all hinges entirely on effective communication.
Communication is the essential lubricant of the entire team mechanism. Success or failure is entirely dependent on clarity and effectiveness. We often focus on the words, but the majority of communication is nonverbal tone of voice, gestures, silence, body language. DNPs have to be accomplished not only in clear delivery, but in accurately interpreting these nonverbal cues. A subtle gesture of dismissal or a tone of impatience can shut down dialogue faster than a harsh word.
Let's discuss the strategy involved in communication. Things like timing and medium.
Timing is absolutely essential. A message may be perfectly phrased and factual, but will be completely rejected if the audience isn't receptive or available. You have to consider the recipient's state of mind. Is there adequate time for a proper discussion? Are they distracted by an emergency?
And the channel matters.
It matters hugely. If the message is sensitive, complex, or confidential, face-to-face communication is vastly preferable to email or group chat, which strips away all that vital context.
And going back to the concept of professional visibility, communication is the primary place where nurses use their voice of agency.
Yes. DNPs must clearly communicate nursing's involvement in patient care. But more importantly, they must articulate the level of clinical judgment and rationale required for those actions. For instance, explaining not just that a patient was moved, but the rationale based on fall risk assessment and unit capacity. It's an accurate, data-driven acknowledgement of the unique value added by expert nursing care.
We also discuss proactive tools to structure dialogue and force respect within the team, which is vital when fighting ingrained hierarchy.
Absolutely. Given the entrenched power dynamics, that cloak of competence, methods that force equal participation are necessary. Tools like the Indian talking stick can be profoundly effective. Only the person holding the stick may speak, ensuring they have the team's undivided attention.
And crucially,
When they finish, the next person has to restate what the former speaker said to their satisfaction. This ensures all members are not only heard, but feel genuinely understood before the discussion continues. It slows the dialogue down, but it maximizes understanding.
And the Johari window tool is about increasing self-disclosure and understanding, which builds that crucial effective trust.
The Johari window helps build trust by focusing on increasing the open area, the information known by both the individual and the team members. The goal is to consciously move information out of the hidden area, things I know about myself but don't share, and the blind area, things the team knows about me that I'm unaware of, into that open area.
So by increasing this shared knowledge,
the team becomes dramatically more productive because confusion, mistrust, and misunderstanding are reduced. It's a structured way of achieving psychological safety through transparency.
despite these tools, several negative behaviors can still sabotage effective communication.
The list is long. But 3 common communication breakdowns stand out. First, defensiveness. This often results from low self-confidence or a perceived threat to status like having your recommendation questioned. It impedes communication through conflict avoidance, the passive-aggressive route, or verbal aggression, the overt route.
And as teams become more diverse and global, cultural differences become significant barriers.
Misreading body language, misinterpretation due to translation issues, or just fundamentally differing communication styles. For example, Western cultures often rely on direct, explicit language, while many Asian cultures rely on indirect communication where meaning is heavily contextual. All team members, especially DNP leaders, have an obligation to increase their cultural competence, to decode these subtle yet vital interactions.
And finally, the classic barrier, jargon.
Jargon must be intentionally avoided. While it serves as professional shorthand within a silo, when you use it in IPC teams, it immediately creates confusion, increases the likelihood of error, and contributes to an imbalance of knowledge and power. Successful teams use shared, inclusive language like we and our, and standardized tools like SBAR to ensure common understanding.
This inherent friction brings us to conflict resolution. Conflict is inevitable, but you argued earlier that it's actually vital for team effectiveness.
It is. Conflict is defined as disagreement, interference, and negative emotion. But when it's handled constructively, it is vital for team effectiveness because it forces a robust exploration of alternative viewpoints. It leads to superior results by forcing the expansion of that shared pool of meaning. The larger that pool, the more ideas and perspectives are brought to the surface, the smarter the decisions the team makes. Conflict is the fire that forges better solutions.
But historically, we noted that nurses were socialized to avoid conflict.
Correct. Nurses often relied on passive-aggressive methods like avoidance, smoothing over, withholding information, or premature compromising, none of which promote the open dialogue necessary for true collaboration. DNPs must lead the move toward collaborative conflict management, aiming for win-win solutions that promote dialogue and honest critique.
And the mastery of these conflict and relationship dynamics is tied directly to emotional intelligence, or EI.
EI is the awareness and purposeful use of emotion to communicate, build rapport, and motivate oneself and others. And the research is decisive. EI plays a far greater role in the success or failure of a leader than pure cognitive ability or IQ. You can have the smartest person in the room, but if they lack EI, they will be a failed leader.
Goldman and others outlined the 5 key realms of EI that leaders must master.
Those are self-awareness, recognizing your own emotions and their effect on others, self-regulation, maintaining composure in high-emotion meetings, motivation, inspiring others, empathy, understanding the needs and perspectives of others, and social skills, building rapport and managing relationships.
The leaders have to model self-control.
They have to, and be highly empathetic to the needs of others to encourage high performance. If the DNP leader loses their temper when a mistake is admitted, they destroy the psychological safety they work so hard to build.
And reflecting on our section on historical barriers, how does EI prevent some of the internal nursing professional issues that impede collaboration?
Well, it addresses the problem of esprit de corps. That is, excessive professional role embracing to the exclusion of other professionals. Nurses who exhibited this over-reliance on nursing identity were found to be less able to function successfully on the interprofessional team. Emotionally intelligent DNP leaders are well suited to recognize individual differences, build on strengths, and mentor colleagues to ensure the entire team operates in a functional, healthy manner, putting the patient goal above professional tribalism. So, with all that theoretical groundwork established, we can now look at how these complex theories of collaboration are being implemented in practice, specifically in integrated primary care models that attempt to address workforce shortages and improve outcomes under the AAA mandate.
The Essentia Health Duo model is a great structural example of embedding IPC by just pairing providers.
In this model, every patient in the system is assigned to an MD plus an NP or PA duo. The philosophy was built around working to capacity and optimal panel size, maximizing efficiency. The most complicated, high-acuity patients were typically routed to the physician.
And the more routine care
Was shared between the MDs and NPPAs. Routine chronic disease management, annual wellness, acute care for less complex conditions. It was a clear attempt to enact that working to the top of the license philosophy.
Did this structured dual provider model achieve consistent success, especially regarding provider satisfaction?
It had varying degrees of success, and it was dependent entirely on local implementation. When it was used well, it demonstrably increased access in certain rural locations and initially led to high provider satisfaction.
Right.
But where local management did not adhere to the task-sharing balance, for instance, if the NP or PA was scheduled only with highly complex patients who required physician input, without adequate time or consultation structure, NP and PA satisfaction decreased dramatically. The system was only as strong as its weakest link in implementation.
And you mentioned the primary barrier to successfully implementing this shared responsibility was the compensation structure. Let's explore that economic issue in detail.
It's the elephant in the room. The production model of compensation for physicians, which is based purely on the volume of procedures, relative value units or RVUs, and unique patient visits they personally conduct. It actively disincentivizes shared tasks.
So if a physician's salary is tied to seeing a high volume of patients, they feel pressure to not cede authority or patience to an NP or PA.
Exactly, even if that NP or PA is equally competent for the task. This production model undermines the collaborative structure at its core, as the financial reward system is still focused on the individual silo, not the team outcome.
To circumvent some of these power and compensation struggles, some innovative models have been led entirely by nurses, avoiding that legacy physician hierarchy altogether.
The DNT-led project at the Thunder Bay Clinic in Canada is a strong, successful case study. That team was intentionally multidisciplinary. It included nurse practitioners, registered nurses, a social worker, a dietitian, a pharmacist, an administrator, and a community representative. They designed and implemented a comprehensive primary care clinic focused on health promotion and chronic care across the lifespan.
And the DNP was the central coordinator and clinical leader.
Yes.
What were the concrete documented results of this nurse-led, systems-focused clinic?
The results were excellent. The clinic exceeded its initial goals, significantly increasing access for unattached patients, those are patients without a consistent primary care provider, and critically, reducing costly emergency department visits by focusing on proactive wellness and integrated care. It demonstrated that the DNP-led model could successfully achieve all three aspects of the triple aim.
Another fascinating example comes from the U.S., the college health example, known as the WellU project. This utilized an ecological approach to student health, broadening stakeholders far beyond traditional clinical medical staff.
And what's particularly noteworthy is that the initial task force for WellU did not include physicians. This intentional omission may have been instrumental in allowing the project to completely avoid the historical nurse-physician power struggles that often derail collaboration.
And leadership was different.
Very. The DNP student leading the project had a mentor with an MSW, a social work background, which kept the team focused on the softer side of human relationships, trust building, group dynamics, that effect of trust, rather than purely on clinical procedures.
And the surrounding institutional culture played a huge supportive role, correct?
Yes. The team worked within a college that espoused Benedictine values since its inception, including community, hospitality, and stewardship. This cultural emphasis provided a fertile work environment that naturally embraced collaboration and shared purpose. And while the team initially suffered from the common storming issues of unclear roles, the overall success demonstrated that building a collaborative culture based on shared institutional values can override entrenched professional differences.
These models prove that collaboration works and is cost-effective. But we circle back to the educational foundation. If collaboration is so critical, why are our future healthcare professionals still being taught in separate silos?
The educational gap is profound, and it directly contributes to the professional barriers we discussed. Most healthcare professionals receive silo education. They're taught almost exclusively by faculty from their own background, often without ever working collaboratively with students from other disciplines.
Which leads to negative attitudes, prejudices, role misunderstandings.
And ultimately, competition rather than collaboration when they enter the demanding workforce. They learn about each other, but not with each other.
This issue led to the formation of the Interprofessional Education Collaborative, or IPAC.
IPAC, formed in 2009 and updated in 2016, gathered educational leaders from medicine, nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, social work, and many other disciplines to formally move beyond these silos. Their mission was to establish core educational competencies to ensure that health professional students learn alongside one another. The goal is that they enter the workforce collaborative practice ready, improving quality and safety from day one.
And DNP programs are instrumental in bridging this gap through their capstone scholarly projects, which have to be real-world, systems-focused projects.
The DNP Scholarly Project serves as a crucial venue for students to practice interprofessional collaboration and leadership, integrating all their doctoral competencies within a complex, real-world environment. For example, the project on the optimal use of individualized asthma action plans in an electronic health record required the DNP student to actively collaborate with professionals in informatics, IT, statistics, and administrative management to successfully integrate the tool into the institutional systems.
That sounds like a perfect low-stakes training ground for navigating the cultural and technical hurdles we discussed earlier, learning to communicate SBAR to an IT professional, for example.
It is. In the pilot clinic for that EHR project, the DNP was forced to anticipate and mitigate barriers like mistrust and resistance to change, particularly between the administrative staff and the clinical staff. It was crucial to continually clarify the shared vision improved asthma care for children and respect the competing loyalties and workloads of the non-clinical providers. This required EI, clear communication, and the use of the voice of agency.
And finally, as care moves to primary care being the central hub of coordination, we have to formally recognize the patient and their family as essential members of this interprofessional team. They are the ultimate stakeholders.
Absolutely. Patients and families need to be intentionally invited into and supported in the collaboration process through actions that promote meaningful dialogue and empowerment. This includes using structured decisional guides like the Ottawa Personal Decision Guide, patient activation measures, and ongoing education about their role. This ensures that the collective cognitive responsibility for the outcome rests not just with the providers, but with everyone involved at the point of service.
Fundamentally closing the communication gap that tragically took Robbie's life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hashtag outro.
So to summarize our deep dive, the political and quality mandates laid out clearly by the IOM and codified in the PPACA's emphasis on the triple aim, they demand collaborative team-based care, and they demand to be led by highly skilled professionals like DNPs. Right. The DNP is uniquely prepared, having been educated in advanced practice, systems improvement, policy, and the leadership necessary to run these complex adaptive systems. However, this necessary transition is being painfully stalled by deeply ingrained historical, cultural, and political barriers. We're talking about the legacy of physician dominance, active turf protection, the societal pressure of the cloak of competence, and the persistence of costly, siloed education that breeds competition.
And so success depends not only on implementing innovative structural models like the Diamond Project and NP-led clinics, but also on mastering team mechanics, using the Tuckerman model to manage conflict, establishing psychological safety, utilizing structured communication tools like SBR,
and developing the deep emotional intelligence required to manage conflict and sustain a shared, transparent dialogue.
It's all connected.
We've seen that the models exist, and the policy has been put in place to support collaborative, cost-effective care. Yet the final immense hurdle rests not just in changing minds and organizational cultures, but in changing laws and economic structures that reinforce the old hierarchy.
Indeed. If nurse practice acts continue to limit the autonomy of advanced nurses, and if reimbursement rules continue to prioritize and financially reward traditional physician-centric, volume-based roles, the system remains gridlocked, regardless of the quality mandate.
So the final provocative question for you to explore is this.
For this new collaborative vision to truly succeed, regulation and payment structures must change. If the monetary incentives remain fixed on the past, will the healthcare system ever truly allow all professionals, especially DNPs, to practice at the very top of their education and training? Or will the cloak of competence always remain draped over innovative team models, keeping us trapped in the inefficiencies and safety failures of the past? Go explore that on your own.